Hello friends, welcome back to Homeschool Journey 101. I'm Helen Hagen and my friend Renee Capuano will be joining us later. This time, these early years, this age 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, are times when your child's brain is just exploding. This is never going to happen again, where so much brain development happens right there in front of you. Your child is open. Everything is yet to come. And so many patterns, so much modeling, so much is going to happen during this time that builds for the future. And so this is a key time for your child to start to learn patterns, to learn how the world works, to start to learn what's out there in this beautiful world and how does it all connect? How can one thing be connected to the other? How does one thing build into the other? And this is the thing to be working on when your child is this age. Some people are going to pick to do sort of random fun things here, there, the other, and that's great. Some people are going to decide that even though it's for most kids very laborious at this point, that they're just going to work on the ABCs. But those things can happen very easily later for much less time. But this is a golden opportunity that's not going to come again. These early years when your child is starting to think, how does the world work? And this opportunity is just precious for you to also build your bonds of your family and set the stage for how homeschooling is going to do, building on those later skills and connecting things together. So without further ado, here we go. Let's get started. So getting a little bit of honeycomb is something that all toddlers seem to love to play with. There's something about that, the texture of that, of smashing it and picking it up again, that's just so attractive to them. The thing I like about using a chopstick is they can't smash too much of it up at a time, so they can really get more good out of that, that interesting texture. And also, it's harder to get a ton of it to eat, right? You can just get a little bit at the end of that. And as this is going, it seems like kids become even more interested in what you've been building for. You've been building this up by showing them a bee every time they saw a bee. They already saw the bee movie. They already saw YouTube videos of what bees do. But here it is in front of them, up close and personal. This is a beehive. Look, there's was a piece of honeycomb. And here is where the honey is, inside of those things. It's interesting how when they have that, three-dimensional experience with it, if you bring back that same book that you've showed them before, and you show them some of the pictures that they've seen of bees, it becomes even more fascinating. They're seeing this idea too. I saw that bee on that flower. I see that this is what happens when you make honey. And I can eat that honey too. First it was the flower, then it was the bee, and now it's me eating this great honey. And so, as you can see here, you can go back to it. It's not just a one-time thing. And as you go back to it over a few days, you can continue to explain this new concept and this idea that the bees eat the nectar on the flowers, the bees make the honey, we're eating the honey. It's fabulous. But if you just pop it into a plastic container, or sometimes it comes in a plastic container and you refrigerate it, it rehardens, and they can continue to enjoy this experience of sort of smashing and exploring and interacting with the very, very intriguing wax. And as they're doing it, you can start to talk to them more about eating and, where does that honey go for the bee? Where does that honey go for people? In other words, how are they going to get it in? How are they going to digest it? And so let's keep going. And so you can see here that I've purchased 5 tomato plants. And the reason they're in these sort of upright containers is that kids can't step on them. So they're really toddler friendly, right? They're upright. Tomatoes are easy to pick. You can see he's here picking some for his dinner. And this is just a really great way where they see it, they pick it, they see what's going to happen. And it's not, when you're working with a toddler, you kind of have to think about what they can do. These cherry tomatoes are really easy. So when he's out here and he's picking the tomatoes, which is great in itself, but I wanted to go farther. I want him to notice the flowers, and I want to point them out. I want to ask him, like, what do you think is happening with the flowers? I want him to notice when bees are on those flowers pollinating him. I want him to notice that first it's a small tomato, and then it becomes a bigger tomato, and then it becomes a colored tomato. And I'll do that by asking him questions and asking him to touch them, and start to think about, like, what's a ripe tomato? How does that feel? What color is that? Are tomatoes different colors? How does this all work together? How does it all work? I want him to start to think about why, how, not just that the tomatoes are there for him to pick, but what went into that. And so he's starting to ask these questions himself, and he's starting to become a person that's looking at the world and saying why. During this part of his life where everything's just exploding in his brain, and there's so much growth, that he is looking at even tomatoes and thinking, how did this happen? Why does this happen? What are some differences? What are some similarities? What do I see in my world? As you're playing and growing and having these fabulous experiences with your child, if you sort of group them in this way, and this is kind of an outline of how to do a possible unit or whatever you want to call it, this will just add richness and help your child make these connections for this brain development. So first of all, you start with the lesson. The lesson is an adventure, probably, somewhere that you go, something that you do. It could be something you're explaining to your child. The second thing is going to be that we pull in depth and context with books, both fiction and nonfiction, and additionally, videos can be very helpful. That visual content could be just short YouTube clips that are, age specific. Like, this is how much your child can really take about bees or blueberries. The next thing you're going to do is some kind of hands-on way that they can learn and explore in this way. It could be something that they'll create. It could be an experiment. It could be something that they're going to do with their hands to understand more about how the world works. And the last important step is to review and put things in context. So you are going to build context by review. As the next thing happens, like, you're going to be able to show them a little video clip of something that they already did. You can talk to them about it, show them a picture, help them review, and help them understand how everything connects together. This is such an important step. You can see here with the blueberry, I'm actually sort of like holding it out so he can just pull one piece off. So it's sort of successful picking with your toddler. Sometimes it's going to be, not just saying, hey, there it is, do it. They might need a little bit of support. Now, you can see here that I've picked out some books about blueberries, and some of them, Jamberry, such a fun book, is, certainly just a fun fiction book. But I'm also going to show him a nonfiction book about blueberries plant, where blueberries grow. And, having that experience of reading about that is going to make it even more, even richer of an experience. A book like The Hungry Caterpillar, showing creatures eating these different things, is a good way to say, what do animals really eat versus what do people really eat? That can be kind of a really good sort of brain development thing to just be talking through. Tomatoes, here we are at a farm picking tomatoes. And when you're with your toddler, they may only pick like 8 tomatoes. And, if Renee's kids have been out, like, picking just like gigantic, beautiful pallets of amazing food. But when you're taking your toddler out, you're probably going to have a better time if you're not imagining that you're going to pick huge amounts of quantities, right? They're going to want to just pick a little bit of it, and then they might want to just play more than you thought would happen. So taking them in and out of the box might be important. Just the coordination of trying to walk up the hill here and put the tomatoes in the bowl, and it might fall off. Kids at this age, they're going to trip. You have to just be ready to be thinking through, like, things might go a little differently than I thought, but it's going to be a positive experience. It's going to be a joyful experience. You're going to be proud of your toddler, whatever they do, however they are working towards it. Although, I also think it's really important to be respectful of the farmer. I mean, the farmer's making a living on this. So I'm always careful if my child actually does damage a plant that I, offer to pay for that. And when you're out there and they're picking cucumbers or whatever it is that they're picking with you, you can be helping them notice other things. So for example, for him, I'm really working on bees, which I'll talk about later. So as we're out there and They can see the bees pollinating. You might be noticing that. If there's worms that they're seeing, you're showing them that. You're showing them bugs, and you're talking to them all the time. You're talking to them. You're asking them questions. Like, you're looking at the different tomatoes, the different colors. These are little tomatoes. These are big tomatoes. This is a yellow tomato. This is a red tomato. If there's a tomato that's broken open on the ground, you can show them the seeds and the little tomato. And it's okay if they are not understanding everything that you're saying. They're picking up parts of it, and you're building for later on. Another thing about going to these farms that's just very fun for kids is walking between the rows. This is a really different experience and something that all toddlers seem to love. So as long as you can, help your toddler to know that they shouldn't be smashing things out, just walking down those rows of props from one to the other, or just the idea of walking along a long, flat road at a farm, especially if you go to one that doesn't have, a lot of cars running around or anything, can be a really fun experience for a child that hasn't done that kind of a thing before. If the farm has sprinklers, you may be able to show them that the water is coming out. All these things you're talking about are building on more than just the experience of being there. In this little video, you'll see that he's looking up and he's saying, up, up. That's what he calls airplanes, it's up, up. And what it is he's already picked up that another thing that's happening in his life soon is he's going to go to airport, and he's not inside but just outside and see the planes take off. And so he's already catching on to the idea that he's watched a little video about planes, he's read a book about planes. A transportation unit is coming next. And so even though you're out doing the other thing, because you, the parent, are there, you can look for pieces of the next thing that you're going to be teaching so that it becomes a richer experience. And later on, when he actually goes to the airport, he'll be able to remember back to when he saw that airplane in the sky another time. You can see here in this little video, he is zooming around in a wagon. A wagon can be a great way to get around a farm, and of course, kids just love it. And you can see that in this picture, he's just enjoying playing with these vegetables that he's got there. And this is another thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about what to pick. Some things are really hard for a toddler to pick. Eggplant is pretty hard. Green peppers, that twisting motion might be just something that they can't quite pull off. But they can still have a great time watching you do it and playing with them, the things that are there in the wagon, if it's something that they can't actually do themselves. But again, you're talking to them about how it grew, all these different things. And although if what you want to do is just go to a farm once, that's great. But for example, I've chosen to go to 4 different farms, in different, that are not too far away from me, to get that idea that this happens lots of places. There's not just like this one place that this happened, but this pattern of things are going to happen. And also, he's being read books of things that are to come. There's going to be apple picking with Babor, or in real life, pumpkins are coming. So this is a hint of what's to come, but it's also showing him like, this is something people do. We have to get our food somewhere. We have to go gather it. It's true he doesn't know everything, but he's starting to get this idea of how these things are going to pull together. Now, because I think that it's when we're having these big sort of things, whether you want to call it a unit or whatever you want to say, when we're talking about these big ideas of things that fit in, I think playing and creating with the idea is also really valuable. So when he's home, we've got these bins, and there's different ways to sort these vegetables, because vegetables, he's done it, right? He's gone out, he's picked these things. He wants to keep touching it and looking at it. So, you can do it like, here's 3 kinds of eggplants, there's this picture, or here's 3 different kinds of vegetables. And this is a great way to be thinking, right? Like, alike, different, how does this work? But the younger your child is, the more support they probably need. So you can see over here that he's being handed 1 green pepper that he's going to take over and put in the bin. And he's being very supportive about that. And there's another one. It's not, the younger your child is, the less likely it is that you can just throw a bunch of things and they can, the first time, sort it themselves. But maybe it's something that they can do later. You can see in this picture too, though, he's being given plenty of time to just on his own put things in the bins and take them out, regardless of if they actually follow pattern or not. So he's having both of those sort of brain building experiences there are happening for him. So another thing that that you could do if you wanted to for this particular situation is, rather than an art project or a book, is actually to make the food. So one really simple way to do it is, of course, he picked those tomatoes earlier. There's basil growing that he can rip off and see. And so he then on his own is thinking of this idea of, what can I do with this, right? So if you put it in a zippy bag and Ziploc bag and you make sure you've tightened it, you can see that by smashing and then using his little hammer, he can smash up the tomatoes and make a kind of tomato paste for himself. And, he's pulled off the herbs that are, wrapped in there too. And so with the addition of a little oil, or in this case, a lot of oil, he's made himself dinner. And so either that can be added to macaroni and cheese or something and not cooked, or you can cook it up and you can put it with the noodles. And, it's just such a delight, right? They realize that they've made it themselves. So this is just a wonderful way to put together everything that has been happening for them. Now, because plants are obviously a big part of this, just a little bit of information for them on how plants grow at this point, I think is really great. So he has a little vase here where some basil's growing. Basil's great because it's pretty easy to rip it off and like I said, add it to a sauce. I have this in a tall vase because when you use a sort of a normal size container, it's pretty easy for that child, that toddler that's trying to rip off a piece, to rip the whole thing out. So by having it in this taller glass, it's much easier for him to actually do it. And so you can see here that if I put it actually in his water table, he can have the experience of watering it himself if he would like to do it. The other thing that he can do out in the world, if you will, is to actually find the roots. So he can see them through the clear glass jar. And by the way, you can buy all kinds of science experiment things where this is done differently, but he can see them in the glass jar, and that's really valuable. But I also want him to have the experience of finding what a root would be like outside. So you can see in these pictures that when a landscaping project's done, he's being given the opportunity to actually dig in the dirt on his own and find these roots. And again, when he's finding these, I'm talking to him a lot about that. I'm showing him how the root connects up to the plant, how we're watering the plant, how it's all together. I also can show him trees in the forest where you can see the root out there. So all of these things are kind of combined to give him this idea of, this is how our food comes to us. This is how it works. Renee, what would you like to say?
Oh, and these are really great ideas with toddlers. And, when we're thinking of our toddlers and we're thinking of these activities and how can you tie them all together, one thing to keep in mind is with a little bit of thought and a little bit of effort, you can turn these fun, entertaining family outings into real educational experiences and build those the brain activity and the thinking activity of your children at that young age. I remember when my boys were very young, we went out strawberry picking with Helen's kids, and each of my very young little boys buddied up with one of her middle school, high school kids and went out picking berries. And when you think of taking your toddler to a farm or to a garden, you want to limit your expectations. You're not going to be out in the hot sun for 3 hours and come back with 30 pounds of blueberries. When I take my boys out now, they may know that they're going to be there for an hour just picking blueberries and come back with boxes and boxes of blueberries. But what I really enjoy watching is the mom out there with her toddler. And they had 2 little toddlers, each have their little bucket. And the mom, I listen to them as they're going up and down and falling in the as Helen talked about, just being able to go up and down those rows. And sometimes they trip and fall with their bucket. But the whole time the mom's explaining to them what's going on and calls them over. Look at this blueberry. And then look at this one that's pink and this one that's purple and this one that's green. And she lets them feel each one at each stage Because not only do they look different, they feel different. And then maybe they taste them and they can see one is sour, one is sweet. And she'll talk about the dirt. And if you see the irrigation line, she'll talk to them about that's how the farmer brings the water in. And they're only there 10 or 15 minutes because that's just about the attention span of what the toddler's learning there. And then they're off to the next field. And I'll hear them talking about the farmer and the tractor. As Helen said, these are building blocks. You're building on what's coming next, what's coming in the next stage. What will they know and be able to comprehend the next year? And when they see this cause and effect of picking their tomato and then mashing it up when they get home. And by the way, when you do that with your children, you're going to see they're going to want to eat all kinds of foods you would have never imagined when they see where it came from and they helped prepare it. These are really not only wonderful memories for you to build with your children, but wonderful brain development activities to put the world around them together and to see how that whole cycle works.
Thanks, Renee. So there's so many great ways that you could connect things, but the thing that's obvious after people eat is animals eat. And so the next step is finding places where your child can have this experience of sort of expanding. So one thing, of course, is an aquarium. And in this time, there are still a couple aquariums in our area anyway that have outdoor sections. One of them is up in Mystic, Connecticut. And so to see the fish in the wild is a great thing if you're outdoors and you can see that happen. But otherwise, to go to somewhere that, if you can, that has an outdoor aquarium that they can see them swim, right? You start to name the animals. So just like when you're out at the farm and you're naming the different vegetables that they're seeing, when you're going and you're looking at the animals, you're naming the animal, right? And you might be starting to have your child think in categories. So just like the eggplant, it's all eggplant, but it comes in different colors. They can start to think like, okay, it's a fish. It's going to be very hard for a toddler probably to tell the difference between a mammal and a fish. But then there's different names, there's different sizes. So this can be a very great building thing. Of course, kids at this age are always going to be interested in what sounds do they make, where do they live. But in this particular situation, I'm focusing on this idea of everything eats, right? And so here you can see that he has an opportunity to feed carp. If you can find a way to do this, carp are a really great fish for kids to feed. First of all, there's a lot of opportunities to feed carp, but you can even do it at a Chinese grocery store. But the thing is, they open their mouth so wide that your toddler will probably actually be able to see that idea really clearly of the fish eating the food, right? So this can be this is one way that you can definitely put that out there. But besides fish, kind of the next thing probably is going somewhere that has a petting zoo. And there's petting zoos everywhere. The thing is to kind of do your homework and see if you can talk to people, make sure that the animals at that particular place are friendly, that it's all set up, it's all outdoors. But most of us are going to be able to find a petting zoo, or if you can't, a farmer. So one thing I was very lucky at with my older children is finding farmers who would let you come to their place. Now, usually if it's somebody that you don't know, you might have to offer to pay a little bit of money so that your children can have this experience of feeding the animals. And I found that a key thing is to talk to them ahead of time, on the farm, like, look, we're going to be respectful of your farm. It's your rules. We know, of course, we're not going to let our kids run wild. And so that's been another way I've been able to make that work over time. So a great place to begin is with dairy cows and milk and ice cream and butter, and how do those things all connect? So there's a fabulous family farm in Connecticut called Fish Farms. There's also lots of great ones in upstate New York, but this one is sort of a quintessential New England family farm. It just makes you feel so nostalgic. But anyway, so the thing that's great about this, or any small family farm, is you can get up close to the cows. And so you can see that this one actually has hay put out there. And so he can give the cow hay, which is a really important link, right? Cows eat, and he can also go over and he can
pretty up and close see that cows drink water. And so these are two of the big ideas, people eat, cows eat, animals eat. But we're just, right now, if all he gets is cows eat, it's great. But on this particular farm, he can also see that cows eat grass. He can see them eating grass. And this is going to be a great time for me to pull out my phone and show him when he planted grass seed in the yard or wherever, if you have that chance, so she can even make that connection. Seed, grass, cow. But now with phones, it's so easy to do all this kind of stuff. So on this farm, you can also see the cows waiting to come in to get milked, and then get placed in their milking station. And he can see the cows eat something else too, grain. So he's already got an idea of cows eat 3 different things. He's seen it up close and personal. You might want to point out to your toddler that the udder is full. One thing I really like about this farm is that you can get pretty close, but there's that chain there, and there's the farmer is so friendly. He's happy to talk to your kids, but also make sure everybody stays safe back there behind there. And a really great thing to talk about, if you can go somewhere that a farmer will let you do it, is actually to have some milk that squirts, that the farmer will let squirt out of the teat, so that exact connection can be made. Because of course, almost everywhere you're going to go, they're going to use the machine, and that might be a little more confusing for your toddler. But anyway, so you can see here, he can see the machine is working, the milk is coming out, and this particular farm also has, and lots of them do, a clear pipe, so he can actually see, the milk is coming through that pipe. And so after that, we're going to go over to the farm store, and we're going to buy milk and talk a lot about, hey, the cows made this milk. The cows made this milk. And when he goes home, he gets to drink the milk. It's so exciting. It's from the cow. But next we're going to take some cream that we also bought there. He is on his own. He's trying to pour the cream into the jar. And it's really important that they can see that this is the cream from the cow that we went and saw. Actually, it will work with very fresh whole milk too. But the idea is that by shaking it, or with younger children, it's going to be pounding it, that sound of pounding is just so attractive to them anyway. So whether he's pounding it or pounding it again, or doing some fancy footwork with it, he's over and over finding ways to churn it. It's very hard for kids this age to do it in one go. So you could just pop it back in the refrigerator at any time, and when they're done with it, and bring it back out again. And it can build that idea that working on something over time accomplishes a big thing. This is just, a fabulous way for kids to learn that experience. So what happens here is, each time it comes out of the fridge, I'm going to show him, and you can see here I've opened up the jar on our rock wall, how little pieces of butter are forming, so that it doesn't just seem like, oh, this happened, it's magic. Over time, I'm opening it up, I'm showing him, look, it's starting to happen. It's slowly forming into that butter. And when you're done, it may still have a little bit of milk kind of around it that you pull the butter out of. If you've refrigerated it, that's less likely to happen. Also, as you can see here, he loves it so much, he's kind of attached to it. He's even swinging with it, whatever he can do to keep moving it. If you have an older child, and you put a clean marble in the jar, that can make the process go faster. But if you do that, you'll probably want to use a plastic jar, because I have had it happen that makes the jar break. So I just, with a younger child, I just stick with that. And again, remember, you might need to use tape. This particular jar, held up really well, and it was fine. So as you can see here, he's been joyfully eating this butter as he's done. Of course, I'm still going to go over with him one more time about the cream and the cows, and even going back to the seed and the grass or the hay. And we saw it melt, and you took the cream, and you've been moving it. So he's learned this process. And he's also learned that working at something over a period of time, it can have a joyful result. This is what we want everyone to realize in the world, right? That things don't just happen, but also that it didn't just seem magic. And you can see that he's eating very interestedly. I just find that over and over again, toddlers love eating the results of their labor with the butter. And having learned this process, it's a big step forward.
You can see right here that he is just very joyfully feeding different animals. He's feeding chickens, he's got goats and pigs, And it's a wonderful experience for them to be able to see these animals eat. And again, if you live somewhere that they can have that experience of feeding the animal, watching the idea that the animal is going to eat, and then if you feel comfortable with it, tastefully pointing out to them that these animals also poop, these animals also urinate, is a great building block into potty training, right? This idea that this is something that happens. So when they are, feeding these animals, watching these animals, again, this is a great opportunity to name the animal, to talk about similarities and differences, to start to talk about patterns. There's definitely going to be babies there. So if you can find a situation where for this little guy, the piglet is nursing on its mother, this is another great way, another connection that can happen. A fabulous thing to do, of course, is to watch a video or go in person so that they can see a cow getting milked. It's a wonderful thing for them to then be able to drink milk afterwards. Some great fun books to go along with this. There's so many books, little farm books that you can find. The Hungry Bear is a great book where at the end you actually see the little mouse eat his delicious strawberry. But it's also good to probably provide a book that's showing what other things animals eat, because especially if you go to a petting zoo, it might be that your child thinks like everything is going to be the same, like all animals just eat this, right? That's a great thing about if you go to a farm and they'll let you feed the horse an apple or whatever. But to have a book, so like here's a book about a camel, and it's showing, okay, the camel actually eats grass too. If you live anywhere in our area, in the Adirondacks, there's a very surprising it's not that little, it's pretty big zoo where you actually drive through, and you drive through and you can see that there's energetic camels that you'll get to hold a cup with food in it, and the camel will actually put his head in your car and eat the food. And there's also a very, most of them very polite, kind of delicate camels eating too. There's ostriches that will eat. Even though toddlers will have to stay in their car seat, having that experience of having those creatures walk up very close to them can also be a way to kind of expand out on their expectations of what can happen there. Now, when you're sort of trying to create and play about this, there's so many things to do, right? Acting out the animals at home, to do the sounds at home, playing in so many different ways, feeding the animals. So much play that you can do with this. A lot of people would also probably choose to do like a little animal book. So you could do a book with, where you did photos of the different animals that you fed, or you did pictures of different animals you fed. I personally, I'm sort of a fan of letting a child do what they could actually do, unless it's Christmas or something and you're just trying to make something cute because you like something cute. But, some people love to just, make cute things, and that can work too. But in these pictures, he's actually finger painting, but you can see he's finger painting with spoons, he's got tongs, because as he's doing it, we're talking about feeding the animals. And so in his mind, with the, using the spoon to move the paint, he's making his, communication sounds he's imagining this idea of, we're feeding the animals eat. So that's the way I chose to do it. But there's lots of different ways that with this project, you can find creative things that your child would like to do. Old MacDonald Had a Farm is a great song for, remembering the sounds that animals make. But you can make your own song up too, where you use your child's name and the animals that they've fed. That can be a really fun thing to do. As part of this, again, because that transportation unit is coming, you can see that he's being read a book that's combining two things: tractors, whoa, so exciting, and animals on the farm. So this is a perfect sort of segue where you start tying these two things together. You can look at the book, you can pick up the flaps, you can talk about the animals that he saw, the animals that ate, just like people do. So that's one way that you could do that. Renee, what do you think?
I really love this section because what toddler doesn't have a fascination with animals? And what a great activity and great memories and great learning experience when you can do some of these things. My kids always loved going to the aquarium, especially at feeding time. And usually those special feeding times, they're all included in whatever your admission fee was. So first thing we always do is look for feeding time on the schedule, and we try to make it to those spots where we can watch the animals being fed. And my kids particularly love watching the sea lions be fed, and the carp, as Helen said. Great learning experiences as they can relate, as they know how they eat, and they watch the animals eat, and you transfer that over. But how exciting for a toddler to get to see those animals up close. Maybe you have a friend. You have a friend that has goats, or you have a friend that has chickens. A great day to go and have fun with friends and get to see their animals up close. Most people are so happy to share their farm animals with friends. And we love going to that Adirondack Park and seeing those ostriches and feeding the camel and feeding the giraffe. What excitement to feed that giraffe a carrot and watch their head come down and their long tongue come out and wrap around that carrot. My kids are mesmerized at any age, but toddlers, you just listen to them giggle, and you listen to parents that explain the whole process. It's so exciting for you, and so exciting for your toddler, and it's really building, as Helen said, those putting that whole picture together that animals eat. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Renee. And then the next piece of this that I like to do is to pick a couple animals that we're going to really talk about more with the child. And, it could be whatever you want. But in his particular case, it's bees, because I've already paid to start being a beekeeper in the spring. So, I've already gone to, buy the hive, to buy the bees. So it's going to happen. So every time I'm seeing a bee out with him, I'm saying, look, it's a bee. And I've showed him a book about bees where the honey, he can clearly see the nectar on the legs. And so when I'm actually out with him, I try to see if we can see that. That's the thing we're focusing on. And the idea that bees make honey for people to eat. So here I'm connecting it back, right? Animals eat, people eat, but animals make things that people eat. So the milking the cow is also a way to do this. But there's lots of great videos online of beekeepers scraping their honey. And there's also, I was surprised, but that the movie called The Bee Movie, even though it's a cartoon and it's not real, that's a way to kind of get the idea to a lot of kids about bees. But the other thing is just this idea of looking in nature. Every time you see a flower, say it, like there's the bee. Try to get them to start noticing, like, oh, what is on its leg? Look how it's different. So whether they're in the stroller and you're on a walk, or here's a little picture of we're actually at a farm stand, and the bees are just loving the garlic chives. And looking at them, starting to notice it, starting to build up information so that it becomes more interesting and he understands what's going to happen. It's very easy to buy a piece of honeycomb at the store and crack it open, and they can really kind of see how this is going to all fit together. So the thing is I'm really making a point of having him notice a few things that are going to happen. When we see worms in the ground, I'm having him notice the worms in the ground. And of course, it's very hard to understand what it is that a worm eats, right? You can explain that the bee is eating, the nectar from the flower. That's an easier thing than the small things from the worm, but it's still building, right? It's still building. But the thing that's going to happen with the worm is we're going to start working on the food chain. So he has an uncle who is going to take him fishing this weekend. And so that worm can go on a hook and you can catch a fish. Now, the great thing about that fish is when you catch that fish, especially if you have an uncle willing to do this, you can cut a fish open and you can start to show him some of those things back that you talked to before, that picture of people eat. by cutting a fish open, you can see some of the basic things that are inside of creatures. You can see bones, you can see a variety of things, and you can take a little bit of that fish home and eat it. So it's not a very long food chain, but it's starting to, that he can start to see what happens. When he's out there looking at the pond, it will be really pointed out to him if fish are jumping to eat bugs. It's the idea of, now we're going to talk about a little bit of beginning of the food chain so that these things are going to connect together. Two really different ideas, right? Bees make honey, or that people will eat, or a worm could be eaten by a fish that could be eaten by us. But we're starting to put these things together so that these bigger ideas are woven into our sort of umbrella of what's happening. The next big thing, the last piece of this, is the water, right? So they've got it down, this idea that people eat, animals eat, some bigger ideas have been happening too. So the next thing that's really very fun is water. We need water, plants need water, animals need water. If they have a pet, it's pretty easy to have them have that great experience of feeding the pet water. It's a great start. If you're at the petting zoo, showing them eating, trying to show them that animals drink water. But otherwise, you can do videos, right? You could do books, but you really are getting this idea that water is essential to people. You can see here that he's being shown to take that cup and water those tomato plants. Again, having those up off the ground so that, I don't have to worry about him stepping on them or anybody else stepping on them. He can just water them himself. And you can see that he is just drinking the water himself, right? So this is it at its most basic idea. I'm going to use this cup to drink some tasty water, and then I'm going to water the plant, right? I mean, that's probably the best connection right there. But you can also see that watering it with a hose will work very nicely. So water through a hose has so many great applications too, for kids starting to realize what water can do. So even in these still pictures, you can see that just letting a kid play with a hose and show them different things that can happen. Water in a stream, water in droplets, if you can, and also teaching them how does water get there. Okay, so let your child turn on and off the water at the spigot. Letting them, you can see here, it takes him a little time, but you can turn it off and on. Letting him see, what's the connection there? How does that work? You can see here's a picture of another little cutie. Both of his parents homeschooled all the way through, and they are at it already with their little guy, letting him squirt the water through this device, even at them. And you can see him roaring with laughter at the joy of this, right? Can you believe it? How water pressure works? You can squirt somebody if I push this. So starting to work on those properties of water, like all the things that water can do.
One excellent way to show children about how rain works and that it really is coming down from the sky and how much is coming down is something like this. So this is a water table. It's a Step 2 Maine USA water table that I've just taken the top off of. So it's just a big open area. And you could also use a big tub of some kind if you had. So what you do is you make sure that you're pointing out to the child that it's starting to rain, and so they can see this big open area, and probably they'll be able to see the rain a little more clearly on the plastic than they can see it just on the ground. You can also help them to hear the sound of it. And if you go back a little later when it's raining a little harder, so that they start to get the idea of, okay, more water is coming in here. Of course, problem if they get a little bit wet, but of course they're seeing it, up close and personal. And then to go back the next day and check out how much water got in there. I'd like to also take out the boat that they have, seen float in the water, so they could get the idea of this is the same water. And so it's beginning with that idea of, water gets collected, water eventually goes to form creeks, goes to form lakes.
It's really such a great thing if when you're out pushing a child in the stroller, you go sometime after it's rained and they can see that water, going down the drain, all right? Even though you might not have to explain the whole thing, you might show them a picture in the book of how this works, but just starting to think about, where does water go? If you can take your child outside when it's raining a couple times and just show them the rain coming down from the sky at this age, it's really great. There's so many little pieces. Putting water in on a plate, just a little bit of water, and then coming back to show them it's gone up in the trees. To let them experience ice and see how it's going to melt. To really point out to them the steam coming out of the kettle. You might want to sing them, I'm a little teapot, and then show them the idea of steam. There's so many different ways that water can be shown to a toddler at this age that will really help them understand how it works. And you don't have to explain the whole thing to them in these hugely scientific terms, but I think it's important to not sort of make it sound like magic either. So if you wanted to, a fun thing to do is to let them see ice melt, but then take that same water, pour it back into ice cubes and put it back in the freezer, so that they're learning this idea of how water, what are the properties of water. You can then take those ice cubes, put them in the tea kettle, and turn on the steam.
Experimenting with shaved ice or snow is something that your child may want to do many times. And you can see here, you can kind of experiment with it almost like sand, where there's lots of different kinds of moving it around and exploring with what it will do that really provides a lot of context. I like to get ice that's been heavily shaved or smash it up because, of course, you wouldn't want your child to choke on a big piece of ice. But the other thing about this is that as they're playing with the ice, it does become clear to them that it melts. The same thing that happens with the snow. And so it sort of has multiple purposes as it's going along. Additionally, I just want to throw out that I use this table so often, this wood designs table made in the USA, for so many projects. It's a water table, but it's so multi-purpose.
And you don't have to, even if their language isn't, huge, if you do that a few times, that's going to be clear to them that all of these things can happen with water. Another kind of fun, simple thing to do, as you can see here, I have some different jars, and I pour, it's hard to see with a smaller container, but by pouring in the food coloring, you can see that, they can sort of see the movement of water, the diffusion through there. You just swirl it. By using a chopstick, it doesn't take up as much space as a spoon, and stirring it, that's a really interesting idea too, right? Like what can be absorbed by water. It's also can be a fun way to do color. So if you want to do a little color mixing, oh my goodness, at this age, the color mixing is so exciting for toddlers, right? But after you sort of demonstrated it, if you want, you can take a little baby food jar, make sure the lid's screwed on tight. You might want to use plastic so it won't get broken. Let your child shake it up and see how these colors mix too. It's a very fun thing to do at this age. And just kind of a little bit of more fun with water. When your child is, outside and they're playing with water, another thing to think about is how water moves. So this little toy is great, actually made in the USA. And by this, you can turn the water to make the water move. The little boat moves. You can put it down and it stops. But a really sort of classic thing is to take a boat on a string, and you can see here, watching the boat go down a creek is a really big thing. And the first time I did this with a child was with my oldest child, and I did not put a string on it because I thought I could catch the boat, and I could not. It did not end well. She was very unhappy about it. So I recommend the string. But the other thing about it is that if you've got a little bridge and the boat goes under the bridge, it's kind of an object permanence thing. This is something that lasts for a long time. You can take the boat with you to whatever body of water that you go to start to get this idea that water moves. And then, of course, you can use the string to pull it back. But the movement of water is a very surprising thing at that age, but a great thing to start understanding.
So if you want to, you can make all kinds of boats of your own, and by adding blocks, you can sort of experiment with your child on, what would it take to sink the boat? Like, how many blocks can you put in here and the boat can still go? And using different kinds of boats, going into different kinds of streams versus lakes, all these are kind of variables to put in this and start to think, think scientifically, asking questions about like, well, what will work? How's this going to go? Even a lake will work, or a pond, to start to get the idea that water moves. And of course, that's building towards that bigger idea that for him is coming in the spring, that water moves from his house down the road, through the gutter, into streams, into a bigger stream, into lakes, into rivers, that big idea. And then eventually to the watershed. So this beginning idea of that people drink, maybe he can drink water at the lake if you live in the right area. Also move into the idea of the bigger thing you're building for is, how water works in the world and in his world. It's great to make your own boats or use any kind of boats, but I do really love this company made in America out of USA, out of recycled plastic even. This boat, I use the same company as the dishes that he's using when he's tasting milk. But anyway, this is a great boat to use if you want to buy a boat. It's super sturdy for toddlers, and you can see here that if you want to attach a kite string to it, you can actually let the boat go out a really long way and bring it back, which is a great cause and effect.
And if you can afford it, or you live somewhere that is possible, at this age, a trip to the ocean is so mesmerizing. And you can see here that he is just mesmerized, right? By just looking at the ocean is just, endlessly interesting. But so is splashing. So, sort of splashing in it, seeing it move around. There's so many things with water that you can point out to your child, like the ripples of going back and forth. Of course, in the ocean, the waves are going to make that a little bit differently. Renee, what do you want to say?
Helen, these are really great ideas. And the great thing about water is you don't necessarily have to go anywhere to illustrate some of these principles to your toddler. You can use the different water that you have in your home, in your faucet, in your shower, outside in your hose. I'm going to throw in one more thing you could try or get. It's very inexpensive, maybe $10 or $15. Order a spout for your hose. We have one that has, I believe it has 9 different types of water pressure that come out, and it is fascinating for children, and you can illustrate so many things. You can set it to jet, where it streams out hard and it goes far across the lawn, to having it come out as a little trickle downpour, and then one setting is mist, and it comes out in every different direction, the little droplets on your child's face. Trust me, they're going to love that mist setting. But they could sit and play with that for a very long time and learn quite a bit about how the different water pressure comes out depending on the size holes on that little spout on your hose. And that's very inexpensive and a fun way to spend a hot afternoon, learning about those different sizes and shapes of droplets and the different types of force, and what happens when you shoot that spout at a ball and it pushes the ball across the yard, or it drenches something. Great ideas with water. I really loved your idea about the boat.
Thanks, Renee. So here's the thing, friends. We know that these first 3 years are the most important years for brain development. I mean, it's crazy how much happens in those early years. And so these experiences, this way of blending everything together, or not really blending everything together, but making everything connect, making it so that it all makes sense and that there's these building blocks. This is how you build your child's IQ, right? This is how you build their understanding of how things go together so that they can just keep growing. They understand the patterns. They understand this idea of how science works. And the thing is, so much of this builds one thing builds after the other. That doing these experiences where you keep asking your children questions, you're explaining these, you're talking, and you're providing a lot of different ways to process this information, you are going to be amazed how much this makes your child love to learn. And you're going to love the process with them. So dive in and remember to just keep being positive, keep helping your child grow. And I know that you're going to look back on these years and be so glad that you put the time into this. Thanks for joining us, friends. Hope to see you soon. Have a great day.
If you liked our videos, it would be amazingly fantastic if you would consider liking and subscribing.